Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Set this up, we're going to get started here. Alright, what we're going to be looking at today Alright, so we're going to look at this fatwa here about the Dahiris. Alright, and the part, I've already translated this part right here. And I was going to move on to the next part, but I want to explain first how I got to. Here's the translation. And I don't know the tashkil, so like I'm not sure if I'm going to get the Arab correct on all of this in reading the Arabic, but starting from the beginning, وضابط القياس قياسي الصحيح هو. So the criteria of valid qiyas, right? The criteria, ضابط is criteria of a qiyas sahih, right? Valid qiyas, as opposed to qiyas al-fasad, or qiyas al-batil. It is أن تكون العلة التي علق الشارع بها الحكم وشرعه من أجلها موجودة بتمامها في الفرع. So what this means is, and it's a little bit difficult to follow it at first. Again, we have to look at word order, word structure, and we have to take, I know in the beginning of translating, you're looking at, you're taking it one word at a time. and getting the meaning, and then coming back to it and trying to put the words together as you go along. However, as you get into more and more like advanced subject material, like this is going to be dealing with usul right here, you do have to get better at holding things in your mind and moving ahead. Even if you don't fully understand everything, you kind of hold the possibilities in your mind, and you have to keep going, because usually, you're dealing in phrases. So, for example, ضبط القياس الصحيح, right? So this is a phrase. And it actually consists of, so this sahih modifies this qiyasi, right? And this dabitu is going to be the mudaf, and then the qiyasi is going to be mudaf ilayh, and sahihi is going to be modifying this. So it'll take the same, i'rab. It'll have a kasra, right? It'll have a kasra on the end here, just like qiyasi. So then the next thing is taking the next phrase, which starts with this conjunction, an, right? So then the next phrase is here, and this is going to be a separate phrase. Okay? And actually, this, it goes this is actually skips to here. Okay? The meaning. So this is a phrase that begins with the demonstrative pronoun allati. So all of this is modifying this. But the actual sentence is أن تكون الإلة موجودة بتمامها في الفرع rather. Okay? And what it means, and so, right, you see what I'm saying? You have to understand that these phrases go together. And so within this alati phrase, you have min ajlihi is a phrase. Alaka begins, this is a phrase up to here. And washara'ahu has the same subject as alaka. Okay, so wow obviously begins something else, but it's a carryover from alaka. Al-shari is the subject of alaka, and it's also the subject of shara'a. So what this means is, and that the illa, right, the illa, or the what I put here, at the motivating reason, or illa, and remember again how if we have a preposition that goes with the verb, which is the case with alaka biha, it's just separated by the subject for the verb. But this biha actually goes with alaka, right? So when we have a preposition that's fixed to the verb, and it has a pronoun attached to it as well, and it starts out a demonstrative pronoun, we say, and that the illa, or motivating reason, with which. So we take the meaning of this, preposition and put it with this demonstrative pronoun, with which the lawgiver, which is Allah, right, or His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, depending if it's an ayah of the Quran or a hadith, connects, and then we take the object, the hukam, and legislates it, meaning the hukam. The who is referring to the hukam. Right? So, is that the motivating reason with which the lawgiver connects the legal ruling and upon whose basis he legislates. And upon whose basis I took from min ajliha. And notice how I put it before the meaning of the verb. Okay, and the reason I did that is because this who is reflecting back to this object for the previous verb, right? So connects is alaka, and the object of alaka is al-hukam. And this who on this verb is referring back to al-hukam, and this has referring back to illa. Right, so we have everything, we have everything referring back to each other. And so in that sense, you can start to combine objects, subjects, and objects. Right? So if we were to translate this literally, we would say, and that the motivating reason be which the lawgiver suspends by it the hukam and legislates it from its purpose, from its route or perspective, is found. You see, it gets too choppy, right? And there are too many reflexive pronouns, too many pronouns that are referring to the same things that we're already talking about. So there's a way to eliminate the excessive pronoun usage. Now, the pronouns are there in the Arabic because they're necessary. They're necessary to orient yourself in the sentence. You can't do without them. But in English, in the translation, you can definitely do without them. And actually you need to eliminate them in order to make it flow. So look what we ended up with. The criteria of valid qiyas is that the motivating reason with which the lawgiver connects the legal ruling and upon whose basis he legislates the legal ruling is present in its entirety in the ancillary issue to which the qiyas is being applied. Now, this is very legal terminology. It's very, very legal. It's very technical terminology, but this is usul. Okay? And so, the criteria, again, we're talking about the criteria for valid qiyas, is that the illah, the motivating reason behind the legal ruling, right? The motivating reason behind the legal ruling. Well, I can't say that because it's going to tell us the motivating reason which the lawgiver connects, with which the lawgiver connects the legal ruling and legislates from upon its basis. So we're talking about the illah, the reason that Allah or His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the reason that they connect with the legal ruling, what they say the legal ruling, the reason for it, and the basis upon which they legislate it, right? That illah, that reason. The criteria for valid qiyas is that reason be present, mawjudatan, bi timamiha, in its entirety, fil far'a, in that secondary ancillary issue that you're trying to put qiyas on, right? So we have a issue, we have a mas'ala, but we don't have a text specifically regarding that mas'ala. But we have another hadith or ayah of the Quran that we know the reason for that ruling, for that other issue, and that the reason for that ruling can be found in its entirety in this other issue. It's related to that. And we know that because the reason for the ruling is known. Right? The إلا التي علك الشارع بها الحكم وشرعه من أجلها. The reason for which the lawgiver, or with which the lawgiver connected the legal ruling, and the basis upon which he legislated it. That reason is present in its entirety in the secondary issue. So that's how we came up with this translation down here, by understanding this Arabic that way. Okay? Now to continue. In addition to that criteria, right? That's one part of the criteria. The other part is min ghairi, this word, not sure this word. Oops. It's this one. So min ghairi mu'arridan, min ghairi mu'arridan or mu'arridun. في الفرع يمنع حكمها فيه. So without, see where are we at? We're down here now. Without something contradictory in the ancillary issue that would prevent the application of the legal ruling to it. So there can't be in this secondary issue that's arisen something that would prevent the legal ruling of the asl, right? So we have the asl and the fara. The asl would be the original mas'ala, the original scenario in which we have the legal ruling from Allah or His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the asl. And in that asl we have the illa, which is the reason that the legal ruling was legislated, the basis upon that for that legal ruling. We have that for one legal ruling. We have that for one issue. In this second issue, there can't be anything in that second issue that's contradictory, right, or that resists the application of that legal ruling for the asl and to that secondary issue. Okay? The reason has to be there, and there can't be anything preventing it in terms of resistance, like a contradiction in the circumstances or in the details, etc., etc. Okay. وكذلك القياس المعروف بالقياس في معنى الأصل. So, and as such, qiyas is known as the qiyas al-sahih is known as al-qiyas fi ma'na al-asl. In other words, the qiyas is well known as the qiyas through the connotation of the base ruling. That means the ma'na of the asl, which is what I was just explaining. The qiyas is the analogy that's being applied to a second issue based off of the concept and the notion and the significance and the connotation that's in the original ruling. Okay. So as such, the qiyas, well known as the qiyas of the connotation of the base ruling, is the legal addendum al-ilhaq بنافي الفارق المؤثر. It looks like المؤثر. الفارق المؤثر بنافي الفارق المؤثر في الحكم. So which is the legal addendum, which means the addition, right? Something connected, legally connected through the negation, the nafi, of a differentiating effect in the legal ruling. So this is just another way of saying that the analogy is being made between these two things, right? One legal ruling from the asl is being applied to the situation of a farra, of a secondary issue. And this is kind of like it's the reason, like the logic behind it is that there's an acknowledgement in these two situations that there's nothing denying there's nothing separating these two issues. In terms of the legal ruling being applied to them. There's no differentiating effect. There's no distinguishing effect between them. No distinguishing influence. Something where you could point to and say, oh, but look, this situation is different because of this. And the effect that the legal ruling will have on this situation is different than what it will have on this situation. So it's the nafi, the negation of a distinguishing effect, a differentiating effect in the legal ruling. When that legal ruling is applied to the secondary issue, there's allowed to be ilhaq, there's allowed to be connection, addendum, adding. Not adding to it, but connecting that secondary issue. There's connecting that same legal ruling to this second issue because there's that connection due to the absence of being able to differentiate between those two issues. Okay? He says, so فمثل ذلك لا تأتي الشريعة بخلافه. He says the Sharia has not come with an example of that. The Sharia has not come with an example which contradicts that. So you're not going to find a situation in valid qiyas that's applied by the mujtahideen scholars where they applied the legal ruling from one situation to a second situation and it fulfilled these criteria, but that the Sharia says no, don't do this. You're not going to find an example in the Sharia where it specifically says do not apply this legal ruling to anything else. On the contrary, you find that from the scholars who have analyzed the legal rulings, they've found that in many cases the legal rulings complement each other, and you'll find that the illah in one issue it'll have that same motivating reason for a legal ruling found in another issue. Even though they're two separate rulings, right? We find that the motivating reason behind those rulings, they're based on principles. And this is how the Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyah came about. The Mujtahideen scholars and the scholars of Usul, they studied the legal rulings and they came and determined that 75 to 80% of legal rulings can be reduced to a handful of Qawa'id, a handful of principles. And these are the maqasid of the Sharia, the objectives of the Sharia. which is to say, what's the purpose of the Sharia to preserve? We suggest that principles, right? They conform to certain principles, and these principles are, out of the thousands of legal rulings that there are, the scholars have worked it out to where, there's a couple hundred principles, right? And even those principles, they're based, a lot of them on one another. They're very closely related. And then the scholars said that you can further boil those principles down to just a handful that cover all of them, right? And so how can we then say, no, qiyas is invalid, right? How can we say qiyas is invalid in the sense that, we're taking a legal ruling and the reason behind it and saying, wait, look over here. Here's an issue that we don't have a text about specifically, but that it deals with a similar issue. And the legal ruling is, the reason for it on this particular issue is the same as on this secondary issue. Right? There's nothing in the Sharia that says, no, don't do that. Don't apply the reason for that legal ruling to this second issue that appears to match it. That doesn't make any sense. If the science of usul dictates that principles apply behind the legal rulings, and that there's reasons for them, oftentimes, and those reasons can be understood. And when they are understood, then in that sense, it's encouraged to apply that reasoning wherever it applies. Right? So, nor does it contradict a text. So again, this valid qiyas does not contradict any text. There's no text saying do not perform qiyas from the Quran and Sunnah. Right? And there's nothing in qiyas itself that's self-contradictory, that would suggest that it's something that is, inconsistent or contradictory. He says, so we will provide examples for you of that. And the ignorance of the Zahiriyya, the what he calls the slandering, disgraceful, the ignorance of the slandering, disgraceful Dahiris will be proven. وَقَوْلَهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ, their statement against Allah and against His Messenger and against His Deen is the most false of falsehoods. Okay? So he's saying that rejection of theirs is among the most false of falsehoods. الَّذِي, which the aql, which the reasonable individual does not doubt in its falseness, in its batlanahu, and the severity of its harm against the deen. Bida'wa, with the claim that they are in agreement with the texts. So this is how they're harming the deen, They reject qiyas, and they say in the rejection of qiyas that they're in agreement with the nusus, with the Quran and Sunnah. And that everything, let's see, where are we at here? And the claim that everything whose wording is not clearly stated in the book or the Sunnah, then it is disregarded. Ma'fu anhu. Then it's disregarded. Even if it is made clear that the motivating reason behind the legislation, the motivating reason of the legal ruling, the hukam, al-mustamilatu, includes the objective, maqsood al-shari, the objective of the lawgiver, in terms of the wisdom of the legislation, the wisdom behind the legislation. That is not clearly worded, right, in the Quran and Sunnah, then they disregard it. Okay? Anything not specifically stated in the Quran and Sunnah, they reject it. They disregard it. Doesn't count. even if the reason for the hukm, for the ruling, includes the intention of the lawgiver in terms of the wisdom of the legislation. So what does this mean? This means that, well, they're going to give examples. They're going to give examples, but the question is, how do the Dhaharis deal with new matters? Well, clearly they use ijtihad. Clearly they're engaging in the qiyas and ijtihad. I believe they engage in qiyas and ijtihad all the time, especially with new matters. But they don't acknowledge that that's what they're doing. They simply don't acknowledge that that's what they're doing. You know? Yeah, their own ijtihad. Yeah, every single one of the Dhaharis, every single one of them will either engage in their own ijtihad on the matter and connect it with hadith, but based out of their own assumptions and thinking about how that hadith applies to that situation, or how that ayah applies to the situation. Because I've seen it time and again. A Dhahari will take an ayah and just apply it to a situation, and I'll be like, well, where did you get that from? Who told you that that ayah applies to this situation? And they'll say, because it's apparent from the text. It's from the apparent meaning. They won't have any tafsir backing it up. They won't have any previous scholar backing up their association with that ayah with the situation they're trying to apply it to. But to them, that's only relying on the Quran. You see? But they ignore the huge part in between what that ayah of the Quran actually means according to the Mufassirin, and they're applying it to this situation. There's a huge part in there where they're making their own, one of their Dhahari, mashayikh that they have overseas. They'll call them on the phone and say, hey, what's the ruling on this situation? He'll tell them, and then they'll do that. So it's a mix between taqlid shakhsi that they perform and, whether it's taqlid, blindly following some sheikh that they consider a Dhahari who's on the manhaj today, that they call on the phone, or taqlid of Ibn Hazm or al-Shawkani or another Dhahari leaning scholar from the past, which there are very few of them, or they just do their own ijtihad. They just do their own conclusion based, conduct their own investigation and make their own conclusion. Which ends up being qiyas anyway, but by another name. They just call it something else. They refuse to accept that that's what they're doing. But the problem with them is that they'll reject what the madhahib say, what the scholars of the madhahib would how the methodology that they used, and anything that they would say, they would just dismiss it altogether, even if they're also relying on Quran and hadith, etc., etc. You see? So all they're doing is abandoning the ijtihad of the mujtahideen scholars of the four imams of Ahl Sunnah in favor of their own or a sheikh of their choosing. And they're calling that, though, that they claim that their claim be da'wa anhum wafiquna ma'al nusus. So with doing that, they claim they're the ones that are in agreement with the Quran and Sunnah, and that the mujtahideen, the a'immat al-arba'a, the four imams of Ahl Sunnah, they're not in agreement with the book and the Sunnah, that they're opposed, that they're against it, that they're tearing it down. So it's really corrupt, and that's why this fatwa is saying that these people, they speak against Allah, they speak against His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they speak against the Deen with this claim that they make, that they're in agreement with the text and the disregarding of qiyas. But it's a false claim. I believe it's a false claim, at least among the juhal, the ignorant neo-Dhaharis who claim to be following that school today. They absolutely don't follow it. Um, it's kind of like the Ash'aris claim that they do tafweed. They claim that they consign the meaning to Allah for all the attributes, but at the same time they're constantly making ta'wil. If you don't know the meaning, how can you make a ta'wil of it? So it's a claim that they make. Oh, we're mufawwida. We make tafweed of the attributes of the sifat of Allah, but the next thing you know, they're making all kinds of ta'wil. You know, and the next attribute they make ta'wil, and the next ayah or the next hadith. Oh no, that doesn't mean that. It means this. Well, I thought you didn't know the meaning. I thought you consigned the meaning to Allah. So it's another false methodology. They claim something, but none of them actually follow it. So it's saying even if the illah of the hukm is made clear, and that illah includes the objective of the lawgiver, it has the reason and what the purpose of that ruling is, and the wisdom behind the legislation. So even if it has that, they still reject applying it to something else. They still reject that could possibly apply to anything else. Thus they render useless فأحذروا مصالح المقصودة من التشريع. Thus they render useless the general benefit intended in legislation. And they say against Allah what dictates that He legislates what is apparently harmful to His creation. This is to say that Allah or His Messenger ﷺ give a ruling about something, and they give us the reason for that ruling, but then they tell us, but that somehow the expectation is not to benefit from knowing the reason behind that ruling, in order to apply it to situations that arise after it, that aren't specifically addressed. That's something that's harmful, because what would we do? We would be left in a situation where we're ignorant about how to deal with anything else that were to come up after the Prophet ﷺ died and after the revelation ceased. How would we deal with anything new that came up in the Ummah if we couldn't use qiyas, valid qiyas? If we couldn't take what we knew about the reasons behind certain rulings and apply them to different situations? Okay, so that's how we got this here. It's not easy. It's not an easy translation. Again, it's modern Arabic, so this isn't classical Arabic necessarily. It's modern Arabic, and it's also very technical. It's dealing with usul. And so dealing with usul al-fiqh, qawaid al-fiqhiyya, and these topics, it's going to be very difficult. But that's just how it is. And, understanding the first part of it is the hardest part. Like getting the vehicle moving is oftentimes going to be the most difficult part. Getting started. Once you get the concepts set in your mind, then it becomes easier to understand what they're trying to say. But if you don't understand how illah works, how, what maqsood, what it means. Because here we have maqsood up here. We have maqsood here, maqsood al-shari, and then we have masalih al-maqsooda. So, but it's the same word, just with a ta marbuta, because it's modifying masalih, the plural of maslah. So, but what is that? What is the maqsood? It's like maqasid. It's the objective, the purpose. Other vocabulary. Ilhaq, Farik al-Mu'athir, Farik al-Mu'athiri, that would be difficult, I think. Understanding what asl means here is important. Obviously, what the difference between asl and far'a is. And that's it, I think. Once you have some of the basic concepts down, the vocabulary, basic vocabulary down, and understand the concepts involved, it gets easier to translate it. But you gotta, like I explained the first sentence, you've really got to, take things one word at a time for the meaning, for the vocabulary, but you've got to come back and deal with phrases and whole sentences. Where you've got to move ahead at times and keep what the possible meanings are, and keep those in mind, and then try to work your way down the page to understand it better. So let's stop there, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.